Hello and welcome to another episode of Only a Bag, an Italy travel podcast. I'm Nathaniel.
And I'm Darcy Melton.
And today we're going to be talking about Florence. This episode is going to be Florence Condensed. Essentially, for those of you who, if you're new to this channel or podcast, welcome. And if you've listened before, for some of you, this might sound like some repeated information, and this will be essentially, if we had 1 hour to tell you everything you needed to know about Florence, what would it be? And then it's this. This is it. You are here. Welcome. So it's going to be a little fast, very bullet pointy, and kind of, fast pace, I guess. Yeah.
Fast pace.
Boom, 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 boom. That's the intent. So I wanted to kind of go ahead and give you this overview of it first, in case you're like, wow, they're really going at it. It's just because we wanted to essentially see if we can condense down a lot of the information about Florence into one episode and hit you guys with it, because we did it for Rome. We actually have to revisit that one, but we did it for Rome, and that seemed to be quite popular in terms of like, yeah, I want to know everything about Rome in an hour.
And just to be clear, this is everything you need to know as a tourist. This is not everything you need to know about history or living there or anything like that. Just tourist info, essentially.
Getting around, getting there, food, this, that, the other thing. So yeah, I think that's everything, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And we want to thank everybody who has been following us on Spotify and Apple and everywhere else, and who has been donating to our coffee. Thank you all so much. Thank you to everybody sending us comments and reviews and all of that communication. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. And if you'd like to follow us, you can do so, as Darcy mentioned, at Apple Podcasts and Spotify. We also have an Instagram. It's at Only a Bag Podcast. You can also send us messages there. We have a website, onlyabag.com. You can send us messages there as well as find most of these things in article forms. If you prefer having a bookmark on your phone or your computer, something you can always refer back to. Last but not least, if you have a Blue Sky, we have a Blue Sky. It has 12 followers. Thank you to everybody who's following. That's not me, Darcy, or my mom. And you can follow us there. It's very much a small little thing. So I think that's everything. Yeah. Thank you again, all. We just wanted to jump straight into this episode. But seriously, thank you all so much for listening, for following, for telling your friends, and for pushing us forward. We appreciate it. So enough of my chitter chatter. Darcy, please take it away.
Let's get straight into this. So I've kind of laid out this episode such that it's in like a chronological order, as if I were a tourist arriving into Florence. What would I need to know time by time? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's perfect.
So I'm arriving in Florence. If you fly straight into Florence, you're going to be flying into the Amerigo Vespucci Airport. A lot of people actually fly into Pisa if you're coming, directly from your home country or another country, because the Pisa airport, I think, is bigger. And also the Florence airport has sort of an infamously short runway. It's not dangerous. People fly in and out of there all the time. But if you're scared of flying, you might want to fly into Pisa or somewhere else and then go to Florence.
On that note, I was just going to say part of that is because large planes cannot land at Florence. Mm-hmm. So I don't believe, I could be wrong, and if I'm wrong, please correct me, but I don't believe any flights from the States go directly to Florence like they do for Pisa or Rome or Milan.
Right. I think some flights come from the UK, for instance, to Florence. Mm-hmm. So if you are arriving in the Amerigo Vespucci Airport, you will likely be traveling to the Santa Maria Novella train station. That is the main train station in Florence. There's a chance that you're staying outside of the sort of historical Florence center in some of the outlying neighborhoods, perhaps in a small B&B, perhaps in an Airbnb. So you might be getting off at a different stop, but very likely you're going to the central train station.
Yeah, I think there's something like 4 train stations in Florence, but this is the important one.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And I think it's just kind of interesting for if you're taking a train or a tram to that stop if you're taking a tram from the airport to the train station, just something somewhat interesting is that I don't think that's like the final destination. I believe it goes to the nearby university after that.
Oh, okay.
So, I mean, you have time to get on and off, but sometimes you and I will linger when we know it's the last stop and they're going to be there for a few minutes. But I believe it continues to the university.
Interesting.
Just as a note.
Yeah. So get off when it's there.
Mm-hmm. So by far the easiest and cheapest way to get from the airport in Florence to the main train station is by tram. And that journey takes about 20 minutes, and it's €1.70 per person, and that's the T2 tram. And the tram stop you can find, it's, a 2-minute or less walk outside of the airport. It is the airport stop. And I believe it's called the Peretola Aeroporto stop.
Okay.
So one thing that you and I were talking about off mic, because we were doing a very light debate, is essentially the official website for the tram says that you have to buy a ticket for each piece of luggage. Essentially, you get a carry-on for free onto the tram. You can take your carry-on or your backpack for free onto the tram, but the official site says that you have to buy tickets for each piece of luggage, and they cannot be heavier than 44 pounds or 20 kilos.
Okay, yeah.
It seems, though, that even people from Florence don't know that's the rule. It seems like it's not really enforced, but the question is always, if you do get caught and you don't have a ticket for those extra pieces of luggage, are you going to be fined? We don't know. There's very little information on this. We just want to let you know that the official site says that you have to buy a ticket for each piece of luggage.
And I would like to simplify this. If it's you and 2 bags, buy 3 tickets, essentially.
Yes, thank you.
Just to be safe. If it's you and, 2 other people in 2 bags each, buy, I don't know what that is, like
3
9
tickets per person. Yes,
exactly.
9.
So it's really quite confusing. And a lot of Fiorentini, also don't seem to understand that this exists. It seems like a lot of the Rixties travel and the Reddit thing travel all seemed very confused. Like, oh, why do you have to buy a ticket for your bag? So it's also, as you're about to mention, I think in a second, there's no dedicated luggage space, which might be the reason for this specifically. If you're going to, if your bag is going to take up the space of somebody standing, you're going to need to buy a ticket for that bag. Right. Very confusing.
And I think that's probably the thought process, but it is confusing and not very clear.
Yeah.
So let's quickly talk about buying tickets for the tram. You can get them essentially there's a ticket machine at that tram stop. You can also get them from on the AT Bus app. And we're going to put that link in the description.
Sure.
That would be easy if you plan on using a lot of public transportation. Having that app, if you're okay having an extra app on your phone, I think will be very convenient. You can also get them from the ticket office if you're coming from the Florence city center to the airport. There is a ticket office that is essentially attached to the train station, but it's not inside the train station. We'll try to put what's it called? A Google Pen. Sure. Yeah, because it's kind of a confusing spot, but it's right in the center. So you can get them there, and you can also get them from any tabaki. Some of the trams do have a tap and go situation, but I don't know if they're all fitted out in that way. And one note for that is that if you use your credit or debit card to buy a ticket on the tram, you can only purchase 1 ticket at a time, essentially. So
per card.
Right, per card. So if you and I, Nathaniel and I, were traveling together, I could not buy 2 people's tickets on 1 card. We would have to use separate cards.
For what it's worth, it also does not work. We've talked about this, I think, in a Rome episode or maybe just an article. It also does not work with the temporary card numbers that a lot of bank cards will give you. You can sign up for the temporary card. It only works a few times or 1 time or whatever it is for certain purchases. That also does not work. So anytime you use that card, doesn't matter if it's a temporary number, doesn't matter if it's a this or that. As soon as you use it, you can't use it for another passenger, basically. So if you're a family of 4, you have to have 4 separate cards or buy tickets.
Yeah, for sure. I quickly want to mention that the bus from the airport is something that you can take, but that's a big sort of, you could take it, you shouldn't. It doesn't really work. It takes 50 minutes is part of the thing. So it's way longer to take the bus than the tram. It's about the same price, I believe, but it's hard to find that bus stop. It's not the same as the tram stop, and it's a 10-minute walk from the airport, and it's less frequent than the tram. The tram really comes, I think it's every 6 minutes. The bus is a much less frequent than that. So I highly suggest not taking the bus.
Yeah.
You can also take a taxi. We've heard mixed reviews on taxis in Florence, and a lot of the reviews are taxis are not great in Florence.
That's about right, yeah.
But there should be set rates. There are 2 taxi companies, but they should have the region essentially, or the city sets the prices. So there should be a €22 flat rate to and from the airport, and around that price. There's different prices for, off hours and holidays, but it should be around €22. And there's a bag charge and also essentially a city charge. So it's going to come around to closer to €25 going from the airport into the city center.
For one person?
Yes.
Okay. So because I think when I read too, it's like it's a few more euros per person, basically, depending if you have how many people you have in the car or van.
Yeah, absolutely. And next, essentially, we're going to be talking about getting around the city, but I want to touch back on the taxis just to continue. So there's 2 taxi companies, but essentially the easiest way to book a taxi, because you cannot hail a taxi in Florence. You can find them at taxi stands and just, walk up to somebody and ask for a ride, but you cannot just hail one on the street. The easiest way to get a taxi is with an app called App Taxi. Also, Uber doesn't really exist so much in Italy. It doesn't exist the same way it does in the US. So you can use the Uber app to get an Uber Black or an Uber van. Did you also find, Nathaniel, that you can use the Uber app to get what would be like a regular Uber, but they'll just give you a taxi?
That's what some commenters and people were saying. It doesn't seem verified. Even Uber says that's not how they work. So I don't know if these people were confused in the order, if they ordered something that wasn't an Uber, or if they ordered an Uber and they thought it was a regular Uber, not Uber Black. But essentially it's their luxury. Uber Black, I think, is their luxury vehicle. And then Uber Van is essentially, like a minivan.
For large parties.
Yeah, exactly. So those are the only, because those are obviously the ones that are less common in terms of taxis. So
it feels like they don't compete with the taxis as much.
Exactly.
But App Taxi, and we'll put a link for that in the description, is a very easy way for getting these taxis. They each also have their own phone number. We'll put those in the description as well.
And if I may, it's possibly just as easy as App Taxi, maybe even easier, is if you're staying at a hotel, they will call a taxi for you.
Yes.
And not for whatever reason, actually for very clear reasons, the taxis will tend to show up at a hotel when they call, rather than, some people have basically said, I'm waiting 20 to 30, 40 minutes for a taxi to come after I've called. But if you pop into a hotel, even if you're not staying at the hotel, people have had good luck with, asking like whoever's running the desk, like, can I give you €5 to call a taxi for me?
That's cool.
I need to get to XYZ. So even if you're not staying there, you might still have some good luck with ordering a taxi. And then of course, if you are staying there, you can just run down and say, hey, can you guys order me a taxi for the morning? And they tend to respect when a hotel calls. I say that too specifically. Part of those mixed reviews are sometimes taxis will not come very early in the morning. If you need to get to the airport early, I think the airport, as you mentioned, or maybe not have mentioned.
I didn't. Thank you for that.
It closes at midnight?
Yes. The airport is open from 5 a.m. to midnight.
Okay. Wait.
So it's closed from midnight to 5 a.m.
Thank you. Okay. I was like, wait, what? So it basically, it's going to be something where it could be a little difficult getting a taxi in the morning, especially, if you're basic. Ooh.
Sorry, I want to correct, 4 a.m.
Oh, even
4
earlier.
4 a.m.
12 to 4. Okay. And so it could be difficult to get a taxi early in the morning, but apparently taxi companies will honor a hotel calling them and actually show up more than if you try to call and organize one. Sometimes you'll get a person saying, hey, honestly, we don't really want to show up for this. It's too early.
Which is hard because, on that note, thank you for mentioning the times, Nathaniel. So the airport is closed from midnight to 4 a.m. and the tram doesn't run until 5 a.m.
So there's like an hour.
There's an hour there that I'm guessing a lot of flights don't happen in that time, and not many people will need to be at the airport in that hour. But if you do, you're probably going to have to get a taxi.
On that note, very quickly, just if you're a backpacker or a shoestring traveler or somebody like that listening to this who might be thinking about staying in the airport overnight, I've heard that the Rome airport, for instance, I think is closed between like midnight and 3 a.m. or 1 and 4, something like that. I think there's like 3 hours in which they're closed. I have heard from multiple sort of commenters and people who say that the Rome airport won't really kick you out if you have a flight, because they understand you get in at like midnight and you have a flight at 4 a.m. They're not going to make you go sleep they're like, no, you're fine to sleep on the floor or on the chairs. However, a lot of the commenters seem to be kind of going the other way. For the Florence airport, they will actively be like, I'm sorry, you have to get out. You have to get out. So it's not an option. I know for some people it seems more common, I will say for people who are from England, because it seems more common for people from England to kind of take longer, like to kind of really maximize their vacation weekend, to be like, I'm going to get a late flight, I'm going to get an early flight back, I'm going to sleep in the airport, coming back sort of thing. So I don't have to book a room. I can really maximize the time as well as minimize the price. However, it looks like the Florence airport will not let you sleep in there. So that just something to consider is if you are planning on like trying to like, if I can sleep in there overnight, that saves me a a place to, a night in a hotel or something like that, it might not actually save you a night in a hotel.
That's really good to know.
Yeah, just in case if you're kind of doing shoestring, if you're trying to do backpacking, if you're trying to do something where, again, I think I say England because there's a lot of those really, crack of dawn flights, like on EasyJet or whatever it is.
Which are the ones flying into Florence.
Exactly.
It's a smaller airport.
So if you're on one of those, you might not be able to actually spend the night. You might have to still arrive first thing in the morning.
That sounds like a nightmare to me.
It really does.
I hate waking up early.
So thank you for letting me have that little, I don't know, not even tangent, just sort of loop back.
So speaking about being out in the wee hours of the morning or the late hours of the night, I quickly want to talk about the Pink Taxi program, essentially, in Florence. And this is it's run through the regular taxi companies, but it's basically just a program for women late at night to be encouraged to take a safe mode of transportation home so that they are safer, essentially. So this is essentially from 9 or 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. If you get a taxi, you get a 10% discount at the end of your trip. And this is a project run alongside Taxi Maman, which is not a taxi service. It's a project for people who are pregnant to get to the front of the date priority for a taxi.
If you're actively about to give birth or currently in the middle of giving birth, you can call a taxi and they will show up immediately, is the idea. There's no waiting around.
Which is really cool.
Yeah.
And the other project in tandem with this is called Davanti Casa. And what is that one?
That one is also, it's supposed to be kind of like this little triplet of projects, but that is aimed for basically making the cab drivers wait for a woman to go into her house or apartment or a lodgings hotel rather than immediately drive away, because apparently there have been some issues, for lack of a better word, of taxi drivers dropping somebody off and then immediately speeding away. And then there's this sort of like, hey, can you not do that? I need some third party eyes on me.
Humans be creeping sometimes.
Exactly. So these are all geared essentially towards, and also too, I will say even with the Pink Taxi, that was even just more of I think one of the things I read from the president of these taxi association in Florence was like 60% of our calls after midnight come from women.
Right.
So it was sort of making sense to prioritize them, like if that's our real base of people, and it mostly just people wanting to get home, like say from like dinner or like a bar or something like that.
Of course.
Not even like, I say it wasn't like clubbing which is I think also totally like
also totally valid.
Yeah, it's also for them, but I meant like with
and I think that's evidenced by the fact that it's not like this window of time is like 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. It's 9 and 10 p.m. So these are people leaving, like you said, dinner, essentially, all the way up until if you're at a club in the middle of the night. I don't know when
or
people go
again
to clubs.
going to the airport pretty early. Exactly. So it's like it's supposed to kind of, I think, encompass a pretty wide variety of people traveling.
Exactly.
I mean, women, but yeah, but for different reasons.
Mm-hmm. So let's also talk about other ways of getting around the city. So there are buses and the tram for getting around. The bus and the tram seem to be awesome for getting around sort of residential neighborhoods and neighborhoods outside of the historical center. Inside of the historical center, where you will likely be as a tourist, the buses are not as efficient, it seems to me. Some blogs will say, of course there's public transportation, it's great. That's not been our experience in the sort of areas where you will be as a tourist. If you are from Florence and you know better than that and you're like, oh, Darcy, our public transportation is immaculate and incredible, please correct me on that. Send us a message. If you're a tourist and you've taken a bus around to different, tourist sites and it's been an incredible experience, please let us know, because it seemed to us that it just was not super convenient inside of that sort of historical area.
If I may, just to jump into offer an explanation or a concrete example, actually, is that if you're at Piazza della Repubblica, which is like a sort of major piazza, it's got a fair, not carousel, and you want to go to, let's just say, the other side of the river, the other side of the Ponte Vecchio, for some reason you don't want to walk across, the bus would take you from the Piazza della Repubblica around to the train station, down south, and then back along the river. And it's something like a 30-minute bus ride where the walk is like 6 minutes. So it's not that they don't go, and I mean, because there really is I think bus stop at a lot of the major areas. It's more that there's not a bus specifically for tourists, obviously, like that, obviously, right? But it's not like, oh, these will hit all the big tourist spots, just be on this bus. It is really more for getting people outside of the area, at the historic area, into the historic area. Mostly,
which makes sense.
Yeah, like workers and things like that, or people who work there have to go, obviously back home afterwards. So it really seems like a sort of a arteries feeding a heart type thing, and not like a sort of cycle within the historic center itself where you can easily hop on a bus. And I only say that too, again, this is for those of you who have trouble walking, or who might just, you mentioned before, like sometimes you, like in Florence, you can get more tired just because you aren't really taking that much public transportation, and you don't really have that opportunity to sit down, especially in the summer where you're hot and you're overwhelmed and you're like, 5 minutes of sitting in something resembling cold air would be nice. It's not as frequent, I think. It's especially like as the metro, for instance, in Rome, or the buses in Rome. So it can be a little harder to use it to your advantage. If you are, again, if you happen to be staying outside of the city center because you're like, I found a great deal somewhere, then yeah, you should absolutely be using the buses. Cheap, affordable, easy, super like straightforward. We stayed, I think, outside of the city center once, and it was way easier than I thought. I thought it was like, we're never going to get to the city center. And it ended up being like,
we were just down the street from a tram stop, because there are quite a lot of them, and the tram was super efficient, runs frequently, and it took us right into the center.
Yeah. So it's like in 10 minutes, it was like, oh, we're here. Oh, that was easy. That was phenomenal. And plus we didn't have to worry. I think actually we were really thankful because you didn't have to worry about the fact that in Florence, it's just so many people are so loud, especially late in the evenings as they're coming home from bars and things.
In the historic center, tourists.
Yeah, tourists. So it was a really kind of nice to be out in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of nowhere is a resident. Like
it was just a neighborhood.
It's like a residential neighborhood, but it was nice because it didn't feel as loud. Everyone felt kind of respectful of like hey, it's after 10. Let's just keep it down.
Yeah, absolutely. So one other note about getting around is you will see these in almost every major city, I think, but is the hop on, hop off sightseeing tours. So in Florence, they seem to be a lot less convenient than some other cities, because these buses are not allowed in essentially the historic area. It's like a limited traffic zone. I don't know if it's a ZTL, which we've talked about in previous episodes, but it is limited in that the sightseeing tourists can't go in this area. So if you get on one of those, double-decker, I think they're double-decker, but hop on, hop offs, they have to take you around the historic and touristy areas. They can't take you to the sites. Which
is a little bit, it's a little interesting. I think because Rome will bring you right up to the Colosseum or right up to whatever, and it's not the same, which it's probably good because I know that they've kind of created a lot of issues for a lot of people. It just adds a lot of,
congestion.
Exactly.
And, absolutely.
It's kind of a nightmare.
So let's hop into toilets. Let me say, let's hop into talking about water fountains and also public toilets.
I love that. But we can also just hop into toilets, just get their feet wet.
Just pastime, hopping into toilets. So public water fountains. We have raved about the public water fountains, the drinking water in Rome. Florence has some, but they are not as plentiful as in Rome, just for a comparison. You can use Google Maps, or I will do my best to link there's a map run by a project in Florence of the water fountains. The map loads incredibly slowly, but it might work for you. It's just, points of fresh drinking water. There's one in the Piazza della Signora, and if you look on Google Maps, it looks like the big famous fountain, which I think is it Zeus, the big
Neptune.
Neptune, thank you. It looks like, because of the photos, that is potable water. It is not.
Right.
Do not drink from that fountain. There is a building where there is a water spout. It's connected to the building.
Fizzy and still.
I know, so fancy, so Italian. So you cannot drink from the ornamental fountain. You have to find the spout, which is potable water.
Yes.
There's also one in Piazza della Repubblica, which is the Nazone. Is that how you say it?
Yeah.
Type, which is a lot of what you see in Rome, and that's a fresh potable water fountain.
But they're not as we've talked about this in the Rome episodes. They're so common, and it was so common to see people just splash water on their faces, their necks, even their feet if they're wearing like Tevas or some sort of flip-flops or sandals to cool down in the summer. And I realized it's a huge part of cooling down in the summer. It's like you could just kind of like find ice cold water, cool down like in your wrists or whatever it is, and then go about your day. And in Florence, it was kind of like, wow, I'm burning and there is nowhere to do this. This always, and which again, I know it's a different geographical like sort of feature in terms of Rome's come from these reservoirs and this and that, and you know, Florence doesn't care about water. I have no idea. I'm making this up. And no, but it's an interesting difference where you think like if you just go to Rome, you're like, oh, Italy has fountains everywhere, and you're like, oh, Rome has fountains everywhere. Italy does not.
Right, exactly. So public toilets are a thing. Again, we will link a cool map showing all the public toilets.
Darcy loves maps. Cartographer at heart.
Yeah, I would love to be a cartographer. Okay, so the toilets are around. They are public, but they all cost money. So all of them cost either €1 or 50 cents to use. We say this all the time, Nathaniel and I tend to go to a bar, grab a coffee, and use the toilet at the bar. Just because it's like a 2-for-1, you get a coffee and a pee. Even though then you do have to pee more often.
Yeah, it's not great.
But there are lots of bars around, so they tend to be convenient.
Plus, no one so far, and we've done this for the last 7 years, 8 years, no one really seems to be bothered that if it's only one of us having a coffee and then we both use the bathroom, or that we split a coffee and then we both use the bathroom. Sometimes we'll ask, like, is it okay if we use the bathroom and just have one coffee? Everyone seems like, yeah, of course. Why? Like, yeah, just go, you know. So there doesn't seem to be, I say that too, because sometimes you can kind of sense that weirdness of like, if you're going to use the bathroom, everybody has to purchase something. And again, I really say this, especially for those of you listening with families, where you're like, I'm not getting 8 coffees every time. I don't know how many people are traveling for family, but you know, especially if you have kids and it's kind of like, you know, the bathroom's more of it's suddenly an emergency. We have to go find a bathroom.
And we don't have kids, but I imagine that the people who run bars are always some of the nicest people. Occasionally someone will be grumpy, but they're usually very, very nice people. So if you have little kids, I think they're going to understand that if a kid has to go, they got to go.
Yeah.
And you as a family just do your best to buy a bottle of water there, because you can get water, not energy drinks, but the like a Powerade.
Like
anything like
drinks.
that. Electrolyte drinks, thank you. Just grab something to be nice and pay them back for their fees of using the toilet.
The flushing water fee. Yeah.
Exactly. Okay. You feel good about that?
I feel great about that. Very briefly, I'm not actually interjecting. I'm interjecting because I realize it's not in our notes, but I did want to mention two quick things about hotels, because I realize this is for tourists and we weren't going to be covering hotels in general because it doesn't matter too much. Stay where you'd like, stay wherever you want, stay what makes you happy. But I did want to mention that first, the star system is not based on like, I don't know, normal star systems. If that makes sense.
It's not like the more stars, the
nicer it is.
Nicer it is, yes.
Exactly. So I say this because there's like still a lot of confusion around it, like on like I don't know, blogs and things about like, not blogs specifically, but like Reddit and things like that. 95% of this is from Reddit and people's confusion about like, I stayed in a 4-star hotel and it was really grungy, and people are like, that's not what 4-star means. So I just wanted to basically throw out there, like, if you see if it's a 4-star hotel or 5 stars or 3 stars, it doesn't necessarily mean it's nice or not nice. Some 1-star hotels are really just beautiful hotels, but because they don't have a parking lot or because they don't have like an elevator, they can't actually be a 2-star or 3-star or whatever.
Right. It's kind of what the amenities are. You get to different ranks of stars depending on what you have available, right?
Exactly.
So like if there's parking, you get in a certain tier parking, or like a restaurant attached, or different things like that.
Elevator.
I
mentioned that because a lot of times a hotel, if they only take up 1 floor, they might not need the elevator, especially if it's like somebody else is using the elevator to get to that floor kind of thing. Like sometimes there's 2 hotels on the same floor, 2 separate hotels on the same floor of an apartment building, and one of them is a 2-star, one of them is a 1-star. This 2-star one is paying for elevator use. The 1-star one is not paying for elevator use, possibly because like, you know, you guys, the elevator's free. Why would I pay for it kind of thing? And so it leads to them being a 1-star, but it could still be a nicer hotel in general.
For instance, we were staying at a place like that where there were 2 hotels on a single floor, and we were going to our hotel that we had booked, and they had more stars. And part of that is because they had a 24-hour desk in the front. The other hotel that both of them had open doors so you could see into that area. It looked like a much nicer hotel, but they only had a person at the desk from, I don't know, like 6 a.m. to
I think midnight
or something like that. Yeah. But it looked a lot nicer.
So I think that was the big one. I just want to, in case you're looking at places, they really don't matter that much. I mean, it does. I mean, it matters obviously, like where you stay.
I would look more at the reviews if you're looking for something like that.
And that was the other one, which is simply sometimes the reviews on Booking, for example, are not great in terms of, it doesn't really tell you too much about the place. Weirdly, Google Maps reviews are better, I find, because well, at least we weed through them. Like the 1-stars are typically, if they're especially the 1-stars are like, you know,
the shower was too small.
Exactly. Thank you.
Well,
exactly.
you're in Italy. The showers are not to
No,
poop on
the
people.
thing. Yeah.
But the showers here are very small.
Yes.
Across the board.
If there's things like the Italianisms, and we've talked about that before we have an episode, Italy's star hotel rating system explained.
And an article.
And we've talked about like sort of what some things to expect, especially. And I think that's a big thing. Like it's easy to assume Italian hotels can be really fancy. I think one thing's like there's no washcloths or something. You know, that's like apparently it's very European. I did not know this. I didn't realize it was European. I'm like,
to not have a washcloth?
Yeah, apparently it's a thing. Even in the States, there's some like Hilton and things like that will have European hotels, like European. It'll be like the Hilton, but it'll be a European style, and that just means they don't have washcloths and they don't have like a conscience. I'm like, what are you saving money on not having washcloths? I don't understand. People are talking. There's one in New Orleans. I'm just butchered that.
Orleans.
No, you guys are welcome. It absolutely destroyed that. And so thank you. That was me. That was my little interjection. Just wanted to throw that out there because we realized we're not talking about hotels only because you and I think, find it to be not the least important, but it's certainly not potentially the most important part of the trip. As long as there's no bed bugs, as long as it's comfortable and it's not loud, it's kind of like I'm not spending that much time in my hotel when I'm in Venice or Florence or Rome. I'm sort of spending the least amount of time possible there and spending more time in the city.
Right, absolutely.
If that makes sense. However, it is something that to you do when you are there, you want it to be comfortable and clean, ideally.
One note, since you were talking about the washcloths, and that blows my mind, I do want to note that it is an old school idea that like in a pensione or something like this, that there would be a linen fee because sometimes people would bring their own bedrolls to certain kinds of hotels. That's not a thing in a hotel. You're going to have linens and you're going to have towels, even if you don't have a washcloth.
Some Airbnbs, though, I will say, especially if you are looking for an Airbnb on a beach, especially weirdly, like any beach towns,
they will have like a linen fee.
And sometimes because they'll be like, I'll bring my own bed sheets, I'll bring my own towels. One of them we saw, it was amazing. It was an Airbnb. It had no toilet seat, and that was a lot of the reviews were about the fact it had no toilet seat, and they were. It's kind of like, again, we've talked about like how it's a thing in like bars and restaurants to have a toilet seat, and they were sort of operating like a bar and restaurant.
In your hotel room or Airbnb, you need a toilet seat. Yeah. That is essential.
And I think, again, they were there. This was a kind of almost marketed towards like a group of young 20-somethings from the city who are going to be 8 of you in the room, and they don't really, they're like, oh, we'll all just squat over the toilet seat for the 2 days we're there.
That's weird.
Yeah. So I just wanted to throw that out there that yes, you also, as you mentioned too, you might see some sort of weird linen thing. They might not wash your towels every day. That's a big thing.
Oh, thank you. That's good. Yes. Okay. So some hotels, and this is also part of the star system, sometimes they will make your bed every day. They likely will not change your sheets every day, and they will not change your towels. That is something that I think maybe you mentioned in an article. I think we also mentioned it in our episode.
I think the Italy Hotel Star, yeah.
On that episode, yeah. So definitely go back and listen to that if you're curious about this. But there is like a standard day. I think it's like 3 days. If you're just staying for 3 days or a week or something like that, they won't change your towels.
And I think a lot of it is because I think even Hilton and stuff, and I say Hilton, I don't know any other big chains, but I'm not like, I don't love Hilton. I just can't remember the name of anything else. They have that initiative now where it's like, let's save water. And I think a big thing specifically in Italy, we've talked about this before, some regions have really expensive water, just whether it's drought related or whether it's just simply expensive water. It's also the cost of running dryers is insane. So this is more to do with the fact that it is astronomical to just wash and dry your sheets every day. So it's seen as a huge waste in terms of
money and also the environment.
Yeah. It's even though people are like, oh, it's supposed to be nicer. It's more of just like, why would you destroy that? Why would you destroy the environment for like new sheets every day? That's ridiculous. Because you wouldn't do it at home. That seems like a huge waste at home. So like, why would you do that when you're not at home? Anyway, thank you.
So speaking of setting expectations, let's talk about expectations for food.
Love it.
So particularly if you're from the US, you might think of Italian food as pizza and pasta. Meatballs. That's not what you're going to find in Florence. Most of what we think of as Americans as Italian food is actually Napolitano food from Naples. And meatballs on pasta are not a thing. We do have meatballs here, but you eat them separately.
Yeah.
So, food that you're going to find in Florence is typical Tuscan food. I will say that a lot of the restaurants that we visited the last time we visited Florence, which was in February, did have a lot of different pasta dishes. So it's not all going to be, peasant-y what is the word for tavolo polvere? No,
cucina povere.
Polvere. Thank you. Not polvere. Polvere.
Povere. I think it's got the L. And I will also say that Tuscany is known, I mean, for its fresh pasta. It is famous for fresh pasta, so you will have pasta dishes. But just when you said being known for pasta, I do want to clarify. It's a lot of the pasta dishes in the States are dry pasta dishes in terms of they are pasta dishes made with dried pasta like you'd find at the grocery store. And so obviously we've talked about this in so many episodes. Italy is very specific about which types of pasta goes with which sauces and which whatever. It's very, very, very specific. And so like in the South, you are not going to get a lot of those pappardelle sort of, honestly, like the peachy sort of dishes in as you would find in Tuscany. Likewise, in Tuscany, you're probably not going to find the same things like the spaghetti al vongole, like the spaghetti with clams, because, well, there's no clams, really. And spaghetti is not as big a thing as like a pappardelle or as any of the other wider tagliatelle, sort of wider noodle shapes that might be easier to make when it's a sort of a fresh pasta.
Yeah, well said.
Well, thank you very much.
So some of the foods that are very typical of Florence that you will find are a bread soup called ribollita, which is fun.
It's quite good, by the way. It sounds terrible.
I think you had it.
You had it.
I had it?
Yes.
Did I like it?
You did, actually, weirdly.
Oh, wow. Because I had French onion soup as a child, which has bread in it, and
I was like, where are we going with this one?
hated it. So I'm surprised that I liked it, and I can't believe I don't remember that.
I know. I think you actually quite enjoyed it because I remember getting something like some sort of pasta dish was okay, and I asked if you wanted to trade because you don't you have a texture issue, and you're like, no, this is actually really good.
Oh, well, then highly recommend the ribollita.
Well, because also it's kind of just a thick broth.
Yeah,
it's kind of what it makes it
wasn't
into.
like chunks of bread.
You're not eating weird wet bread. It's just like it kind of just made it like a really thick broth.
Well, okay, I got to go back there and try that again. Another typical food you will find is, and a lot of the typical food after I mentioned the bread soup is going to be meat dishes. So I haven't eaten them. I'm vegetarian. But cingale is wild boar. That is huge. No, they are big creatures, but that is hugely popular,
as a dish,
I should say.
yes, it gets and everything.
Lamprodotto or tripa is tripe.
Yeah.
Super popular and classic in Florence. The bistecca alla Fiorentina, the Florentine steak, I'm guessing you've heard of this or seen it. Giant steak. A couple of things to keep in mind for this. It is not a one-person meal. It's typically split at least between 2 people, but more than likely 4 people. So if you're going with family and you all eat meat, would be pretty cool for you. One other thing to keep in mind is that typically chefs and if I don't know if they identify as cooks, whoever it is, who's ever making your food, will likely not prepare the steak more than cooked rare. That's the majority of people believe that is the way it should be eaten. So just keep that in mind. If you're somebody who likes your meat burnt or well done, this might not be for you.
And a lot of places will genuinely outright refuse that. I mean, some places will refuse to even go up to medium. I mean, you can kind of get away with medium, like some pink, but a lot of places will not because, again, they're like, that's not how the dish is made. It's the same thing as any other dish, though, I will say. It's just, I say that because as like an American specifically, it's common to be like, how would you like this cooked, whether it's a hamburger or a steak? But you never say like a pasta dish. Just like, I want it like this, but make it like this instead. And they're like, no, you ordered this dish. This is kind of what you're getting. So I think it's the same thing. They're like, no, the bistecca alla Fiorentina is rare. If you want it not rare, then order just a regular steak, and then I'll just burn it for you, if that makes sense. Because there are regular steaks, I should add. There are definitely regular steaks. If you're like, I don't want whatever it is, 1 kilo or 2.2 pounds of meat.
Right.
I just want like a little cut of meat. There are absolutely just regular steaks, and you can have them burn the heck out of it.
And one thing we should mention here, we've talked about this before, and this is an all across Italy thing. So there are different courses for food. And your pasta course comes before your meat and vegetable course. And one thing to keep in mind for meat, if you're coming from a lot of other places in the world, you might be thinking of a plate of food with, like a carb and a meat and a vegetable all in the same plate. That's not how it works here. So if you order a piece of meat, you're getting just that piece of meat on a plate.
Yeah.
It's not coming with a side or anything like that.
Exactly.
So the last one that is very classic and great for lunches, and also I just love them, is schiacciata, which are sandwiches. And they're pretty specific to Florence in their sort of profile. So it's essentially, would you call it focaccia, sort of, the bread?
Schiacciata.
Schiacciata is the kind of bread, but I guess it's close to.
It's like maybe crispier focaccia potentially.
Okay, and it's giant. Like it's large and I guess somewhat flat. And All'Antica Vignaio is very famous for it, but there's so many sandwich shops in Florence where you can get this kind of sandwich.
And for what it's worth, and I was going to say the sandwiches are schiacciata sandwiches or like panini or whatever it is, and the bread is called schiacciata. I only say that because it can be a little confusing if you're looking at some place like, oh, they have schiacciata, and you go and there's just bread, and you're like, isn't there sandwiches here too? I don't understand.
Yes, good point.
It is a lot. It seems like a lot of people call them schiacciata as in like that's a sandwich, but also it's a panino, which is also a sandwich, but also like the bread is schiacciata. So sometimes you go to a bakery and they have the bread, or there's like schiacciata all'uva, which is with grapes. So then it's like, what is going on here? Like, what is the name of what? So it can be a little confusing on first glance.
Absolutely. So speaking of the schiacciata all'uva, let's talk about 3 different pastries. Yes.
First, actually, can I just mention very quickly that dinner time is at 7:30 in Florence?
Yes, thank you. Very important. So dinner time is always earlier in the north than it is in the south, and we have found that it is around 7:30 in Florence, which means that aperitivo hour is about an hour before that, so 6:30.
Which is all to say is if you're kind of doing a trip where you're going north to south, like you landed in Naples and you're going north, you might have gotten used to a 9:30 dinner in Naples, and now you're thinking like, wait, did I just miss dinner time? Because you go to a dinner at 9:30 in Florence, and there's a really good chance they've already done their last seating or that they're even closed. And then, of course, as you mentioned, the aperitivo, obviously this is not like, compulsory if you're visiting. However, when in Rome, do as Romans do, and which just means, if you're at the end of a day, you're kind of like, you know what? Let's have some food and drink before our food and drink. You can absolutely have an Aperol Spritz, a Campari Spritz, a beer, a soda, whatever you'd like, a little bowl of chips, and then that's usually an hour or so before dinner. Sometimes in the South, it's like at 7:30, and then dinner's at 9:30. Kind of depends. And this is usually before both dinner and lunches. Mm-hmm. But I think the lunchtime is largely unchanged. Like we noticed, some people like white collar workers were having lunch at like 12, and I didn't know if that one was felt maybe somehow more like how their business worked, and because a lot of other people were having it like 1:30, so it seemed like you just have your like work's lunch break is at 12, but a lot of other people seem to be having it at 1:30. So at least in Florence specifically.
Yeah, absolutely, that's good.
So.
Good tip.
Pastries, I apologize.
Okay, so I'm only going to mention 3, and I have to say that we need to go back to Florence to try lots of pastries. So like every other place in Italy, they have specific pastries that are, to their city. So, Nathaniel, you mentioned the la schiacciata with uva. So that's the bread with grapes in it. And I know that sounds weird, but it's delicious. And I don't like raisins, but they're not raisins. They're like just straight up grapes. Yeah. And it's incredible.
A lot of them, I will say too, they have seeds in them. So essentially it's this weird, hot, wet grape with seeds in it and then bread. And it sounds awful, but it really weirdly works so well.
Yeah. There's another version. It's not another version of that same pastry, but it's called basically the same thing. It's called la schiacciata. And this is not, it doesn't seem like it's made with the same bread, but it looks like that kind of sandwich, which I think is why it's called this. And it's essentially a yellow cake sandwich with whipped cream or panna.
Beautiful. How could you go wrong?
Sounds amazing.
How could you go wrong?
And the next one is I papataci, which is, it translates to the sand gnats, but they're not sand gnats. They're more like tiny mosquitoes. That's not what you're eating.
Either way, it's wrong.
What papataci means, but it's please, Florentinians, Fiorentini, don't come at me. I'm going to compare it to what's it called that you like? The pain au raisin?
Yeah, the pain au raisin.
Also, French people, I probably said that wrong, but it's a swirl of pastry with custard and raisins.
It's really good. I like raisin dishes, apparently. I'm big on raisin dishes, or grape dishes, I guess.
I just bonked my mic. Sorry. Hope you guys didn't hear that. And the last one we're going to mention is called Il Bundino di Riso, which is like a little tiny pie with rice pudding and custard inside.
I will say we had something similar to that because it was a Carnivale thing, and it was essentially somehow I remember being fried rice. It was kind of like
was that in Florence that we had it?
Yes.
Okay.
And it was supposed to. We thought it was gonna be very similar to what we're having in Venice. I had to pause because I was looking this up. Frittelle. I had total brain fart. We had the frittelle al riso in Florence, and it was. I love pastries. I want to be very clear. Slightly disappointing, I will say. It was cold rice with some sort of like a cream custard and a bite, and it was not what I thought it would. I guess I read it al riso as like, oh, it's like rice flour, like this will be sort of light and fluffy, and
but
then
it was
like
just like rice on the inside.
yeah, and I was like, oh, that. So I will say that one took like the second one I enjoyed. It was the first one that was like that first bite where I was expecting light, fluffy, and then kind of custard filled, and I was like, oh, this will be fun.
But those were fried balls, right?
Yeah.
Okay, this one is slightly different in that it's like a crostata. It's like in a crust, pizza
And then
pie
like
crust.
baked, I think, right?
Yes.
Okay. Good to know.
Yeah, so we'll try that one next time.
Yes. My gosh.
So let's hop into briefly talking about cafe culture.
Yeah.
And we've mentioned this before, and we probably talk about it all the time. But one big note on getting a coffee or pastry or anything like that in Florence is that a lot of these cafes are fairly touristy and or at least used to tourists. And we've often talked about how confusing it can be. Like, do I go to the bar and order and then pay, or pay then go to the bar? We recommend that if you're in Florence, pay first at the cash register will be separate from the bar. Pay there first, make your order, then take your receipt to the bartender, which is the barista, the pastry person, all of that. Pay first, just generally.
Yeah, no, and there's obviously some things where that doesn't work in terms of if it's a smaller cafe or if you see a lot of other people ordering first and then paying afterwards, et cetera, et cetera. But by and large, especially in the city center, it's just easier that way, and it's easier to not get any sort of weird feeling. Like, just in the sense, sometimes I think when you order first, there's a sense potentially, if somebody doesn't want to tell you to pay first, there's a sense of like, they're watching you to make sure you don't just walk out kind of thing. So it helps alleviate some of that tension, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And as with anywhere else in Italy, it will always be cheaper to have your coffee and pastry at the bar standing up than it will be to sit down.
I would say at least the coffee. The pastry, I don't think those are, there's no like price, like set price difference, if that makes sense.
No, you're right. But there's like a sitting fee that is
yes.
tacked on to everything when you sit down.
Yes. Sorry. I just wanted to clarify. There's no like, I don't think there's a set pastry rate across Italy, but absolutely I think in every municipality or at least every region, there's a set coffee rate.
Yes, absolutely. That makes the coffee cheaper at the bar than, is it the coffee price changes when you sit down as well?
I think they can, that's actually a good question. I don't know if there's a sitting fee and
I figured it was just always a sitting fee.
I think there's always a sitting fee.
Okay.
You know what? Now that you say that, yeah. I think it's just a sitting fee.
Potentially the food and drink is the same price, but you will have a sitting fee.
And sometimes it's exorbitant. So that is just something to pay. I mean, we've talked to this a lot if you've never heard us before, but we went to Capri once. It was like €1 something for a cappuccino. We ended up spending €8 each because we sat down with them. That was just like annoying, you know, like €8 for cappuccino, even like for New York City feels exorbitant. But
that was before we were really up on the Italy travel know-how.
Yeah,
many
like
years ago.
2014 or something. That was almost or more than a decade ago. We were young baby-faced travelers.
Yeah.
Now we're still baby-faced.
And some cafes will have it listed like on the board where you see the prices for everything. They will have like al banco, which is at the bar, and a tavolo, which is at the table. So sometimes you can tell ahead of time what the price difference will be.
So much easier.
Okay, shall we hop into talking about museums?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, Florence, famous for museums. There are tons of them. And one big note we want to warn you all about is that it will take about half a day to see any of the major museums. Of course, there are smaller ones and you might be able to get through the lines faster and through seeing the sites more quickly. But if we're thinking about the let me try that again. The Galleria dell'Accademia, where the David is, or if you're thinking about the Uffizi, which is just massive. It's like over 100 rooms, I think.
Or the Pitti Palace.
Pitti Palace, exactly. They will take at least half the day, if not more. We haven't seen the Pitti Palace, but I can say the Uffizi, I could be in there all day.
And I will say, even just on that note, because I'm really glad you mentioned that, is you're an artist. I like art. We're both two people who enjoy museums, I think, and really do enjoy museums. Like anytime we go somewhere, we try out the museums just because it's kind of fun to be like, what are they doing differently? Edinburgh had great museums that we're blown away by. And we've been places that have sometimes Rome's museums are like, oh, you guys just put some stuff in a room and hope for the best. So it's a little bit of a, toss up. But I will say that even though we enjoy museums tremendously, it's also the half a day thing is kind of where we start getting really tired and just like
it's exhausting.
And sometimes there's nowhere to sit. Oftentimes it's unair conditioned, so you're not like cooling down in the museum. I will say, because a lot of, I think the Louvre is like that. There's a whole couple wings that are unair conditioned, so it's not like, oh, we're in there and at least we're having a nice cool day on a really hot day.
It can sitting and gazing at some art. Yeah.
It can be just like, oh, I'm sweating profusely and there's nowhere to sit and there's a crowd of people and we're all looking at this piece of paint and I don't even know what the painting is about. I don't even want to be here. So it's a whole thing. And I will say, because our knees hurt, our feet hurt, like we both left feeling 40 years older just because we're like, I'm in pain and I'm really hot and sweaty and I just want to eat something. So and I say this to good people because a lot of people like to plan the Uffizi in the morning and Academia in the afternoon. And I'm like, oh my gosh. Don't do that. Please don't do that. Because also you're going to just hate everything you see.
Plus the lines take a very long time. In the least touristy season, there are still lines. So you have to think about that as a time constraint, but also as a physical constraint. If you're standing in line for that long, you're still going to be tired.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And one note is that you will often see, especially if you're waiting in line to get tickets, or if you already have tickets, you bought them online, you still have to wait in line for a certain amount of time. On that note, even if you have a designated sort of appointment time to enter a museum, you will likely still have to wait in line with all of your group of people who also bought tickets for that appointment time.
Yeah, I don't think we've ever not waited. Even when we have an appointment time, like we're like, 3:15 or whatever, we're in line with people who had an appointment at like 2:30 and are still waiting in line. So I don't really know.
I still recommend getting your tickets ahead of time.
Oh, for sure. I was just meant like, it's not like a Disney Fast Pass. You don't go to the front of the line and like smirk.
And what looks like a Disney Fast Pass is what I want to mention. There are often people selling tours that will like take you to the front of the line and you go through the museum on a tour with them. And it costs way more than just entering the museum on your own, but it feels like, oh, I'm going to get to the head of the line. What they don't tell you is that, or I don't think they tell you this, is they only go to certain points. And this was very evident when we went to the Uffizi. You and I were wandering around on our own, just gazing at things, chatting, doing stuff. And we saw these tours that were just almost running through the museum to see certain pieces, and they weren't even necessarily like the most famous pieces or the rarest or the most culturally interesting or anything like that. Sometimes they would just pass by something that I thought was incredibly fascinating. So it's important to know that if you do one of those tours, you might not get a chance to see everything because they kind of rush you through.
Yeah. It can be a little disappointing.
Yeah, absolutely. One note, I keep saying one note, another note on museums.
Note number 8.
Yeah, is that there is something called the Firenze card. And that sounds a lot like there's the Roma Pass in Rome. And that, I believe, that gets you into certain museums, and it also includes some transportation. The Firenze card does not include transportation, but if you go on their website, which we will link, this gives you access to all of the museums in their they call it their circuit. But it's all the major museums you can think of, plus a lot of smaller museums. And you get, when you purchase this pass, which is €85 for a 3-day pass, and right now, as of June 2025, for free, you can add on 2 days to use essentially anytime in the next 12 months. So if you're there for 5 days this summer, you can tack on those 2 days for your trip, or you can use them if you plan on coming back in the next few months or whatever.
Especially if you're in like the UK or somewhere that's a little bit easier to reach.
Exactly. And I say as of this month, 2025, because they're free right now, but usually tacking on those extra 2 days is another €28. But all in all, it really seems like if you can afford this is it's a good like kind of coupon style situation because it's only €85 and you get access to so many museums. And the thing is that you can only get one entry to each museum. So you can't, keep going back to the same museum with this card, but I feel like it really opens up that situation. And some of the museums, and they'll let you know, you have to make a reservation for, so that they can, manage their crowds, but not all of them.
It's also, it's while it sounds counterintuitive as well, it does help people like yourselves, tourists, to go to museums you might not otherwise go to in terms of, like I've already prioritized 2 or 3 museums. I'm probably not going to those other one and try to go through the hassle of buying a ticket for them. So a lot of it, because Rome had that as well, people thought like, oh, people are going to prioritize like the Colosseum and stuff. But what ended up happening is people were going to ones that almost never get foot traffic because like, well, it's free and I might as well check it out. Like I don't have to worry about and I feel like I've already got good use of my car. So if I hate it, I can just walk out in 20 minutes. So it does actually, for you listening, it would also help if there's just like, I want to check. I think you mentioned off mic, it gets you access to 5 different gardens.
Yeah.
So it's like, if you also kind of want to have a little nature walk, not nature walk, but very sculpted nature walk in terms of like, I want to check out some I don't know, rose bushes. I have no idea.
They're almost, I would say, some of them are almost like botanical gardens. They're not as big as that, but they're large, curated, beautiful gardens.
Yeah. That's just an interesting thing if you guys are curious.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to check that out next time, I think. So I think our last note is on emergency numbers as a just in case.
Can I mention actually very quickly in leather and then emergency numbers?
Oh, yeah, my goodness. Thank you.
No, I was thinking it's good to tie off with emergency numbers.
Yeah.
I only wanted to mention leather because I know that some of you have heard, obviously, that like Florence, leather, they go hand in hand. And we've mentioned this in a few other episodes. And I figured if this is the only episode you listen to about Florence, it makes sense to mention the leather in Florence, specifically in Tuscany. Looking at what other Florentinians say, there is a massive amount of like distrust around the classic leather markets in Florence, the outdoor,
like the open air,
the open air outdoor ones where everything's jackets and bags and everything's dyed, beautiful colors and things like that. There's a lot of people have a lot of distrust, even when it says made in Italy, as we've mentioned before. As long as it's finished in Italy, in terms of they put a zipper on or a button on or something like that, then it can be made in Italy. So there's a lot of distrust. A lot of Florentinians who do buy leather goods, or even people from Tuscans, will say, look for made in Tuscany. That does seem to have more protections on it than made in Italy.
That's cool.
Another thing people say is actually, like, if you're in Florence and you really, really, really want leather goods, obviously in Florence, there's the Scuola de Cuoio, leather school, that's what it's called. Little pricey for sure. Really high quality stuff. They're basically training leather workers. There are other schools, like some of these students will go and have created their other, not schools, I guess, shops within Florence. So you can find stuff there. People have mentioned too, a number of people are talking about how if you go to like Siena, for example, a leather shop in Siena will cost 30 or 40 euros less for the same thing you might find in Florence. But they've also mentioned that if you go to like Montepulciano or something just outside of
just towns outside.
Yeah, exactly.
Florence.
Any town outside of Florence, you would find a much cheaper, still great quality, but much cheaper because there's not as much rent, namely, and you don't have to compete with other things. And so you can kind of have a little bit more of a choice. I mean, even here, it's I can get a pair of sandals made here for 60 euros, and leather sandals made here, but then as soon as I go to Rome or something, it's 150, and let alone Florence. So all this is to simply say, if you really have your heart set on something leather, like I really want a pair of sandals, I really want a bag or even a wallet, or if you want to get like a slew of gifts for people, it could be interesting to kind of take a bus to another small town, a town that's still interesting, to be clear. Not like, don't just go to like, I don't know.
That's what I was going to say, is that do look up leather shops before you go somewhere. I don't want you all to assume that every town of like 100 people has some master leather worker.
It does not.
That might be the case for some places, but do look up places before you make that destination.
And you can also call, like Google Maps should have numbers and stuff. You can call and be like, hey, I'm coming today to, are you open today, kind of thing. Because sometimes they'll be like, I'm actually open like 3 days a week. I have two, one leather shop here, one leather shop there. I bounce between the two.
Or I'm 85 years old and I don't want to be open today.
Yeah, that's another option too. But if you like leather, basically, if you're looking for something leather good, I just wanted to mention, because it seems like you should if you're talking about Florence, that a lot of people who live in Florence, who are from Florence, tend to have a massive distrust of the markets there in terms of quality of leather, in terms of it being essentially the same thing we've talked about with masks in Florence and Venice, or like literally anything in Rome. There are touristy shops and there are artisanal shops, and almost pretty much nothing you're going to find on the street in terms of from a street vendor will be artisanal. It'll potentially still be leather.
In terms of leather, yeah.
In terms of leather, it'll be genuine. It'll probably like a leather blend, and then they glue it together. So it won't be like one nice piece of full hide or whatever it is. I don't know that much about leather, to be clear. I did have to look up a lot of this for this little snippet, but it is, I just wanted to throw that out there for those of you who really want to, like, a little kind of quality heritage piece to bring home.
Yeah, absolutely.
Emergency numbers.
Well, I want to mention artists.
Yes.
Sort of street artists, I guess, people who sell their goods on the street. If you want to buy locally made art, there are two places. There are lots of shops, but if you're buying on the street, around the Duomo, there are often artists set up around. It's actually really cool. If you go sort of early-ish in the morning or before like 9:30, you can see artists bringing out like their carts, getting ready to set up. It's very cool. So there are often people painting there and selling their art, as well as in near the Uffizi, there's like an open air like hallway. It's the central sort of, it's not even a piazza, but the central outdoor area between the two buildings of the Uffizi. Thank you, the courtyard. Going towards the Ponte Vecchio, there are tons of artists as well set up. I will say that I'm an artist and I'm always interested in other people's work. One thing this is not shade at all, more power to all of my fellow artists. But do look out for, sometimes people will have like a template that they use to recreate over and over a very similar image that is valid as art. But I just want to note that that is something people do, where other people will will create a new piece each time. Does that make sense?
And I think actually weirdly in Paris is when we really got, I don't know, somehow tuned into it, because we saw it a lot in Rome and Naples. It was like they would start with like an ink drawing and then they would paint over it, and not necessarily paint like the building. It would just be kind of like loose colors and it's kind of beautiful, and it's whimsical, and it's European. And I think we were in Paris years ago and we saw people doing the same thing with Paris. Like, it's like a kit, it's like a set.
And that's the thing. Sometimes you can tell that they have purchased almost a paint by number from something, and then they're just painting over that, where other artists have created their own template and are painting over their own template, and then the next level, the other version is that people just create from a blank space a new painting each time.
And I will say there's one woman at I think it's the Pitti Palace. It's just across the Ponte Vecchio, the Grand Palace there. She does watercolor that you like, because it is all from, it is like all her. Like there's no, she's an artist.
There's no template,
Yeah, and then there is an older guy in the courtyard of the Uffizi, who also, I think you were watching it for a bit once, and he also just sort of, he might be using like a photo as a reference or something like that, but he still is painting it himself. Mm-hmm. And I think, these people don't move that frequently, because most of them have a little, I think it's a license, like a little permission slip, something explaining where they can be. So it seems like when you fight for your spot at the Uffizi, for example, you're never going to leave. So you will see the same artist over and over again at the same spot, which is kind of cool, because it means like, it's not like I have to hunt down the artist if I like a piece. But no, it's a great way to buy like local art. And I'm sure you were gonna follow this up with, it is pretty like local art price in terms of it's not like $5 for a hand painted piece, essentially.
No,
it's affordable, but
I would say it's anywhere between like 40 and 100 euros for a small piece. That is off the top of my head from what I think I saw. And as an artist, I find that incredibly affordable for all of the work that goes into these pieces. So that is all to say that these are set prices that, you can't barter on that. And it is good to know, I think, that these are just really, really well-priced things, because people are selling them on the street, not in a gallery. They can probably get away with selling them for less than they could in a gallery. So yeah, great place to buy locally handmade art for a really, really good price.
And of course, there are, as you mentioned, there are tons of galleries. There are tons of like small artists having their own stores and shops and things like that.
Absolutely.
So if you're in the market for art, Florence is definitely the place to buy it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Emergency numbers, though.
All right, let's round up with the emergency numbers. So these are all emergency contact numbers that work all across Italy, but we like to repeat them just because it's good to know.
And again, if you hear no other episode, then it's good to know these. Basically, we've talked about these before, but essentially, this is important to know if you never listen to us again.
So these are Italy's version of like America's 911 and the UK's 999. Those are the emergency numbers in those countries. So Italy's main emergency contact, which will send you to an operator and they can decide like what kind of assistance you need, is 112. Just like 911, it is 112 here in Italy. If you're having a specific issue and you know who you need, for the police, you can call 113. For fire, you can call 115. And for essentially health or an ambulance, you can call 118.
Yeah, that's good though. I'm glad that thank you for sharing those, because I think it's important. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, 112 works in Europe. It's a European-wide number. So in case you happen to go to France afterwards or something like that, and you're like, I have 112, but what was the other one? It's 112. You're totally fine. So it makes it a lot easier, I think. But again, hopefully you don't have to use them. I think even it's essentially what the big one, 118 for the ambulance. If you have like a heat related thing, if you're just feeling really woozy, if it's like middle of the summer and you're like, I think I might pass out, hit that 118, try to explain their situation. We've talked about this before. It's a different number. It's much longer, but in Rome during the summer, they have a specific emergency number. This is not the Rome episode. I don't think Florence has one, unfortunately, but they will have, like, in the summer during the heat waves, they'll have like things on standby, like ambulances and these cooling centers and things like that. So you'll be safe. But I think that's everything.
I think that's it.
That's amazing. And I want to also throw into, if y'all listening, if you have like a favorite leather store or a favorite pastry place or a favorite type of pastry, we'd love to actually genuinely hear about it, because one, when we go back, we'd like to check it out, and two, we just like to have some more information.
Or a favorite local artist.
Or a favorite local artist. And if there's anything in the episode too that you want us to expound on, or if that we have gotten wrong, please let us know. Obviously, we want to make sure we're giving quality information, especially in the one episode. Again, this is designed for those who maybe you don't listen to anything else. You're just typing in, on podcasts like Florence, what do I need to know? This is the episode. So if there's anything like that, please let us know. You can reach us at Only a Bag Podcast on Instagram, onlyabag.com. You can send us a message there, as well as find most of these in article form. And I think we also have believe it or not, a Blue Sky. No one knows about it. Only 12 of you do. It's, I think, Only a Bag.
It's very elite.
Very elite. Very, very chic. And that being said, if you'd like to support us, we also have a Ko-fi, ko-fi.com/onlyabag. We deeply appreciate all of your generous donations. Thank you so much. It goes towards buying us a new microphone, so hopefully we don't sound like we've just been screaming for the last 2 hours. I mean, not that we do, I hope, but it's these mics, I think, just like we get tired, I think the mics get tired towards the end of our recording. I really
think they do.
They sort of start fluttering a little bit, and we have to keep pausing and re-recording. So thank you all so much for listening. We hope that you have learned something from this episode and that it provides you with tons of good information.
Yeah, we'll talk to you next Wednesday. Tanti abbracci.